Chapter 11 Ocean Battle. Where are we now? Asked Dr. Lin. The Tasman Sea, between New Zealand and the Australian mainland, replied Admiral Wilcox. We're almost there, Dr. Andrews added. Yeah. Where's Godzilla? Dr. Lin asked. We've lost track of him, the Admiral replied. What? Dr. Lin gasped. Admiral, we can't afford to lose track of Godzilla, Dr. Andrews barked. You'd think I don't know that, but we did. He just disappeared. Our satellites lost him. No thermals, no visuals, not even radiation scans picked them up. He's just gone, the Admiral countered. He's using the hollow earth to travel, Sarasawa said from the back of the bridge. What do you mean, Doctor? The Admiral asked. Godzilla must have sensed Kong and knew that he's getting closer to another entrance. If Kong makes it into the hollow earth, Godzilla probably won't be able to sense him anymore because of how strong the magnetic and energy fields are down there, Sarasawa continued. So, he's trying to catch up before Kong escapes? Great, Dr. Andrews said as she sat down and rubbed her temples. Where's the nearest entrance to the whole Earth? Sarasawa asked. Dr. Lin checked the tablet, but Antarctica, and it's not connected to any opening in the ocean. So if Godzilla's using a tunnel from the ocean, then it's not one that Apex knows about, he said. Sarasawa frowned deeply. There is much more about Godzilla and the Hollow Earth that I'm sure Apex doesn't know, despite their claims, he said in a low voice. Out on the deck, Kong was enjoying a large feast of fish caught for him by the other vessels. These treats taste funny. Crunch, but they are filling. Crunch, crunch. Maya, meanwhile, approached Kong while he had his back turned to her. Walking up close to one of the containers near his leg, she checked her surroundings before seemingly reached into one of the gaps, and then retracting her hands. Quickly, she walked away and back to the stairwell, where she smiled to herself before walking up to join the others again. So, how can we find Godzilla? The Admiral asked. Godzilla is using one of the tunnel systems, Monarch documented. Let me make a call. By the time you make that call, Sarasawa, we'll all be face to face with him, the Admiral barked. Sarasawa ignored him and dialed a number on his phone and hit call. The phone rang a few times and then picked up. Doctor? Came a voice on the other hand. Vivian, please forward me all the data you have on the Hollow Earth tunnels, which Monarch had scanned. Of course, Sensei. The phone call ended it, and a moment later it lit up, and Sarasawa opened a document sent to him by email. The document was expanded in his phone view, and Sarasawa held it up for the Admiral to take a closer look. There is an entrance just south of the tip of New Zealand. Godzilla is likely headed there, Sarasawa said. Then, depending on how fast he can swim, he might cut us off, the Admiral whispered in horror. A Monarch chopper arrived on the scene a few minutes later, and both Joe and Ford emerged before heading into the main bridge area to meet the others. Gentlemen, I'm glad you could make it, Sarasawa said. Joe and Ford greeted everyone with smiles and handshakes. Glad to be here, Joe said. So, this is how we're doing it, huh? Ford whispered. Yes, Sarasawa said it with a nod. So what's up with Godzilla? Ford continued. Godzilla has entered the Hollow Earth tunnels and is presumably heading for an entrance ahead of us, Sarasawa said. That's not good, Joe mumbled. Regardless, we're almost there. If we can manage to get to Antarctica before Godzilla catches up, then we can get Kong into the tunnels and proceed with the mission, Dr. Lin said. Hey everyone, Mark said as he too arrived a moment later. Sorry I'm late. It's okay, Mark, Dr. Dr. Andrews said. Maya entered the room and leaned against the wall nearby, but couldn't escape a brief scornful glance from Dr. Andrews, and for a brief instant she could smell, she could hear, a she could saw a hint of fear flash across Maya's eye, but she dismissed it as nothing when Maya flicked a bang out of her eyes. Mr. Brody, you and your son witnessed the San Francisco incident, right? The Admiral asked. Yeah, that's right, Joe replied. Do you remember anything about Godzilla's arrival that showed any kind of weaknesses? He asked. Why do you ask? Serizawa inquired with narrowed eyes. If Godzilla does attack, you said we need to remain neutral, but there's no way we can do that. If Godzilla wins, there's no guarantee he'll stop at Kong. What if he turns on us? The Admiral asked. He won't, Dr. Chen said firmly. How do you know, Doctor? The Admiral asked. She glared back at him. Didn't think so. Now, Mr. Brody, anything? He asked again. Joe glanced at Sarah, who solemnly nodded to him. Yeah, when we saw when he was hit in the gills by the missiles fired from the ships in the bay, he flinched away from the impacts. I think his gills are a soft spot in his neck. And if my memory serves, the Muto managed to hook on into one of them, which made him bleed pretty badly, Joe said. I see. So, if he started showing more aggression, aim for the gills, the Admiral replied. Godzilla won't attack, Ford said. Lieutenant Brody, I'll ask you only once to mind your tongue. I know you're on Godzilla's side here, but remember you're still in the Navy. Yes, sir, Ford said through tight lips. The Admiral nodded it and glanced around the room. We've got a plan. We won't attack unless Godzilla turns his aggressions towards us. But if he does, we won't hesitate to use all we've got against any and all weaknesses we can identify, he said. Kong growled, which caused a low tremor to shake through the ship. Everyone looked outside towards him, but looked at each other when it appeared. He settled back down. Can we focus on getting Kong to Antarctica? Dr. Andrews asked. Red lights flared to life, and the sirens began sounding. The sonar imaging showed on the main monitor for them all to see. Oh shit, Dr. Lin said. They all looked out towards the water ahead. Godzilla had arrived. His spines broke the surface of the water about a mile ahead on a perpendicular path to their course. His pace slowed and curved towards them as he centered himself on the vessel carrying Kong. Shuttle engines down! Now! Sarasawa yelled. Fuck! The Admiral exclaimed. He grabbed the radio and called for all engines to stop and all weapons to be on standby until further orders. This better work, Doctor, he said to Sarasawa. Godzilla slowly came to a stop out in the waters ahead and rose out of the water, treading water at waist level. He looked directly at Kong, who glared back at him with a snarl. Where's Gia? Dr. Andrews asked. Oh no, 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 Dr. Lin said as he looked down at the deck near Kong. Gia had reached the bow of the ship after running around Kong and waved her arms to get his attention. That is Godzilla, she sighed. He is not enemy, Kong growled. I sense enemy, Kong replied. No, not enemy, she insisted. Kong looked out at Godzilla, who continued to tread water. His eyes narrowed, but his lips relaxed slightly, and he sat up with a bit straighter. I found you, rival. Godzilla's lip curled back as he let out a low grumble of his own, which shook the waters around him. Let us see if you understand. Godzilla reared his head back and unleashed a powerful roar while flashing the lights in his eyes and back at Kong. A response. Kong sat quiet and still, his calm glare never wavering. Godzilla snarled. You do not understand. Godzilla slowly leaned forward into the water and swam towards Kong's vessel. The Admiral reached for his radio, but Serizawa stopped him and shook his head. Dr. Andrews had run out and managed to fetch Gia before running back into the bridge with her. Don't ever do that again, she sighed angrily. Gia sadly nodded. Kong, meanwhile, growled as Godzilla grew closer. He could just barely see Godzilla's eyes above the water's surface as he swam, and, although the pace was slow, Kong couldn't help but tense as he pushed himself up onto his knees, which was as far as the chains around him would allow. Godzilla stopped once again, approximately 500 meters away, and began to tread waters again. You do not understand. I understand. Godzilla's head snapped up and his mouth closed. He blinked twice, but leaned in a bit as he regained his composure. Do you? Yes. Did you not understand my warning? No. Then you do not understand. I understand you. No, you do not. To everyone watching, Godzilla and Kong were both snarling and emitting low-frequency growls and grumbles at one another. What are they saying? Dr. Chen asked. You think that's a conversation? The Admiral asked. Of course it is. Animals of all kinds can understand each other in ways humans can't, Mark replied. Whatever, the Admiral said, shaking his head. I am here to give you a warning. Why a warning? You threatened the natural order of our kin. How? You exist. That is not a crime. It is when your cause can bring a response. Our kin only answer to one alpha. I do not call to anyone, but you can. What does it matter? Our kin will come to war if they answer to two. You will bow to me as Alpha, and I will call and assure them of your place amongst them. You are no Alpha to me. I am the Alpha. Godzilla's tail rose out of the water and slammed down onto the surface, causing twin walls of water hundreds of meters high to rise into the sky and disintegrate into mist around him. The balance and safety of our kin is my responsibility, and your presence endangers that balance. Godzilla used his tails to propel himself still upright forward to within 350 meters of Kong's ship. You will acknowledge me as an alpha. You will bow. No. Godzilla roared and flared the light in his eyes and spines once again, which Kong did not respond to. He only continued to glare. For the sake of our kin, you will bow. No. Godzilla lurched forward and stopped 100 meters away from the ship. You will bow, he roared. No. Godzilla roared furiously, which elicited a similar response from Kong, who roared back at him at a near equal volume. Godzilla, everyone on board covered their ears except Gia, and when the roaring stopped, everyone began moving about frantically. We need to prepare for a response, the Admiral said. No. If we do anything to upset them, then we will earn Gojira's wrath. Serizawa rebutted. We already have, the Admiral said as he pointed outside. Godzilla's eyes and spines were flashing. No, Gojira is warning Kong, not attacking, Serizawa said. How do you know? The Admiral demanded. That because the lights are intermittent, Mark yelled. It's an intimidation display. If it were his attack, it would be solid. I'm done listening to you, crackpot scientist, the Admiral growled. Maya, meanwhile, saw Godzilla circle around to the side so Kong could get the full view of his display as they continued growling and snarling at one another. Now or never, she thought. She reached into her pocket and pushed a button. A second later, the siren device on the table which Mark had brought with him blared to life. What's that? The Admiral yelled. The siren. It's detecting something. Mark said as he looked at the readings. Oh my god, he whispered. The siren displayed two words. Monster Zero. Godzilla's response was instant. The lights in his back solidified, along with those in his eyes. He turned fully to face Kong and began taking in a huge breath, with Kong looking around by his feet. Set Kong free! Dr. Andrews yelled. Are you frick? Are you crazy? The Admiral yelled. He's dead if we leave him tied up. Do it, he yelled. The Admiral was too late to stop it. Jaya had made it to the lever, holding Kong's restraint, and pulled with all her might until it snapped into place. The restraint around Kong's wrist and ankle snapped open, releasing him just in time to grab a container and hurl it into Godzilla's face, causing him to roar in surprise and turn away, shaking his head. No! Serizawa yelled. Godzilla's eyes snapped to Kong, who glared back at him defiantly while holding another container. Godzilla began charging his breath again, and as Kong threw the container, Godzilla simply closed his eyes and let it strike true. Nothing. The container simply exploded on contact with his scaly flesh, releasing all of its content into the sea. Godzilla's eyes opened and his eyes flashed blue as he opened his mouth and unleashed his atomic breath directly at Kong. Ducking just in time, Kong flattened himself against the ship's deck to avoid the blast. Thankfully, it was a short one, but it still singed a few furs on his back. Kong quickly stood up, but was not quick enough to grip the ship before Godzilla's tail swung around through the air and knocked him off and into the water. Now beneath the waves, Kong was all but helpless as Godzilla tore through the water and slammed his head directly into Kong's chest. Kong's mouth opened and a massive torrent of bubble escaped as he pushed back through the water towards one of the other vessels. His head struck the hull, causing the ship to dent nearly in half before it snapped and began to sink. We've got to help him, Dr. Andrews screamed. We can't. There is no way we have is going on to do anything against Godzilla except make him mad, Mark replied. There are still those skills, the Admiral rebutted. Mark spun around. You really think a few missiles to the gills are going to stop him? He growled. Kong managed to pull himself together quickly enough to slam an elbow into the back of Godzilla's skull, which thoroughly dazed the mighty reptilian behemoth. Kong pushed Godzilla down and kicked him in the side just below the lines of his spine and used that to push himself to the surface to take in a massive gulp of air. Swimming to the ship he started on, Kong hauled himself out of the water. We've got to get out of here, Dr. Andrews barked. We knew this was a possibility, Dr. Andrews. We must let Nature take its course now, Cyril said. Screw nature, Admiral. Throw up the engines and get us out of here now, she yelled. No need to tell me twice. He picked up the radio and ordered all ahead full as Godzilla continued to reel from the blow to the back of his head. The ship fired up the engines and took off at full speed. Kong caught his balance as it lurched into motion and looked around for a better place to stand. Spotting the aircraft carrier, Kong jumped off the cargo ship and onto a destroyer before using it as a launch pad to hurl himself over and onto the carrier. The landing caused the carrier to lift hard to the rear before slowly settling back and continuing its forward movement. Godzilla Godzilla finally shook off the stunning blow and popped his head up to see what was going on. The vessels were in motion, and Kong was on a new one near the other side of the fleet. Godzilla snarled and dove into the water before disappearing into the depth. I bowed to no one. Kong beat his chest, but there was no reply. The water had gone still, but the sound of Godzilla's roar echoing through the ocean was still present. Kong cautiously leaned over the side, peering into the water, but not but a second later, Godzilla launched out of the water, slamming his snout into Kong, causing him and the carrier to tilt to the side and the vessel to capsize despite Kong's attempt to save it from doing so. Now back in the water, Kong scrambled to get back up onto the ship's now capsized hull, but was grabbed around the ankle by a painful vice-like spiky clamp, which could only be Godzilla's jaws, and pulled into the depths. Beneath the waves, Kong looked down and saw a red streak through the water originating from his ankle. Reading the pressure of the bite, he kicked down and stiffled his toe as they slammed into Godzilla's face and put a lot of pressure onto Godzilla's right eye. Kong dug his toe in harder and leaned forward with a balled up fist aimed right at Godzilla's neck. Godzilla let go of Kong's ankle and leaned back to avoid the blow, but he still caught the edge of the fist against his lower jaw, which knocked him for a bit of a loop. Turning around and shaking it off, he looked back. He looked back quickly and used his tail to grip Kong's leg, which just below the knee, and yanked him back down. Turning at the same time, Godzilla lurched forward in an attempt to get a bite in on either his arm or shoulder. To his surprise, Kong pushed his elbow out towards Godzilla and slammed it into his mouth. The movement drew blood, but Godzilla was stuck with his jaw pushed as wide as they could naturally go, with Kong priming his leg before slamming into Godzilla's stomach as hard as they could. Godzilla floated down into the water, leaning forward in pain as Kong swam to the surface and hoisted himself to the side of the carrier. Gripping the side, he pushed it up and managed to right the ship before hauling himself onto the deck. Godzilla's roar echoed through the water again, and a moment later, Godzilla launched out of the water and crawled up onto the carrier. He pulled himself to his feet. As he pulled himself to his feet, Kong let loose with a powerful punch across Godzilla's jaw. But the blow was glancing as Godzilla had moved his head at the last second, having learned from the previous punch. Godzilla swung back with his claw and slammed it into Kong's jaw, knocking him onto his back as Godzilla walked cautiously forward on the now highly unstable vessel and began charging his atomic breath. A few moments later, a stream of missiles hurled through the air and slammed into Godzilla's neck and shoulder region, causing him to flinch away and turn partly to what had happened. The trail of smoke led back to several ships in the areas which earned a vicious now from Godzilla before he felt a blow to the side of his head. Shaking it off, he stood up just in time to see and feel Kong's body slamming him right off the edge of the carrier and into the water once again. The water began to emit a blue light, and Kong knew all too well what this meant. Kong observed as the light reached its peak and jumped off the side of the carrier as Godzilla's atomic breath tore through the vessel and into the skies above, splashing down into the water yet again. Kong spun around and saw Godzilla close his mouth and look at him with still glowing eyes and a flickering through his spines. Sarasawa, what do we do? Dr. Chen asked. I don't know. I was hoping Kong would not aggravate Gojira, he replied. It wasn't Kong that started this, Sarasawa, Mark said. He turned the siren and showed Sarasawa the Monster Zero reading, and both Dr. Chan's and Sarasawa's face drained of color. Oh no, Sarasawa whispered. What does that mean? Ford asked. Monster Zero was the three-headed dragon, Joe said. Fuck, Ford said quietly. But how did Kong emit his call? Dr. Lin asked. It couldn't be Kong. Something else have to been responsible, Mark said. How do you know, Mr. Russell? Maru asked. But because even if Kong's intelligent, you can't change his vocal cord. Something letting out a frequency matching Monster Zero's. The source was close to Kong, but not exact to him, Mark replied. So you think something has Monster Zero's voice? That Maru asked. No, it had to be mechanical. We need to check the deck for a device of some kind. Mark replied. We're not going outside. Dr. Andrews barked. Fine. Stay in here. I'm going to see what I can find. Mark barked back. I'll go with you, Dr. Chan said. Me too, said Ford. And me, Joe said, gripping the wheels of his wheelchair and pushing himself after them. Meanwhile, Kong managed to surface momentarily once again after pushing Godzilla away. His reprieve was short-lived. Godzilla sharked out of the water and grabbed Kong by the shoulders and slammed his jaws down onto Kong's clavicle. Kong let out a roar of pain as a searching heat ran through his chest and arm. He tried to pry Godzilla's jaw free, but his bite force was too powerful to move. Kong cut his finger on Godzilla's teeth in the attempt. On the deck, the team searched everywhere for a sign of a device that may have been responsible for Monster Zero's scar. What would it look like? Dr. Chan called. It would have to have a speaker on it somewhere to emit the frequency, Mark replied. I think I found something, Ford called. But everyone ran to Ford as he held up a small rectangular device which could fit in someone's pocket. It had a tiny speaker on the end of it, but nothing else. No marking, no indication of manual activation, nothing. Is that it? It has to be, but there's nothing on it, Ford said. It must have a remote somewhere. Let's see if we have anything to trace the signal, Mark suggested. Suddenly, the device began letting out a sound again. Oh shit, Ford said. Godzilla broke the surface not far away, with blood still dripping from his jaw. He made his way over towards the ship and everyone froze as he approached. He wore a vicious snout as he leaned in and took a look at what was happening. Sarizawa, thinking quickly, grabbed the device from Ford and rushed out into the more open area of the deck and held the device up towards Godzilla. Everyone else remained frozen, too scared to move. Godzilla leaned down to the edge and his eyes landed on Sarasawa. The doctor put the device on the ground and stomped on it over and over again until it broke and the signal coming from it stopped. This result garnered a reaction from Godzilla, who straightened a bit while still looking down at Sarasawa and his company. In the water behind him, Kong surfaced and grabbed a hold of one of the destroyers to hold him above water. The bite marks in his shoulder were horrific, as well as several scratches along his shoulder and neck around them. He breathed heavily and coughed up a lot of water as Godzilla slowly turned his hand to look at him out of the corner of his eyes. Kong glared back, but could do little but weakly fight for breath and snarled at him. Godzilla looked back down to the humans on the ships. The intruder should be dead, but you brought him here to me. The others began gathering around the one who destroyed the box. You showed me the device. Perhaps it is another that makes the calls. The humans began leaving the deck, returning to the stairwell to the bridge, and soon disappeared from sight. Godzilla leaned down and looked into the glass to see them gathered inside, and Kong roared at him. Godzilla straightened once more and turned halfway to glare at Kong. Today was a warning, wavered rival. Should we meet again, you will bow. And if I don't... Godzilla's eyes narrowed and his lips curled back. I will kill you. Godzilla slid into the water and disappeared into the gloom, leaving Kong to swim back to the cargo ship, where he promptly collapsed and fell asleep. Chapter 12. What drives you? Fuck, Ford whispered. That was too close, Dr. Lin said, hands still shaking from watching the brawl and how it ended. Serizawa, Admiral Wilcox began. We lost several ships in that fight, which is exactly what I was afraid of. You said we should trust Godzilla, and right now, I don't see a reason to do that anymore. So I'm gonna need a very good reason why I shouldn't call the White House and inform them of what I saw and what I think we should do from here. Serizawa regarded the Admiral with a cold stare. Gojira left us all in peace once I showed him the device and crushed it. That is proof enough that the device was responsible for him attacking. It looked like he was going to attack me regardless, the Admiral replied. That's not true, sir, Mark interjected. Godzilla was flashing an intimidation display. He was demanding Kong back down, and when Godzilla started charging his attack, Kong was looking down at the ship near his leg. He could hear the signal too, and so did my siren device. He held up the device, which still showed the reading of Monster Zero, and that means what? And that means what to me, Mr. Russell? Monster Zero is the code name for the three-headed dragon Godzilla defeated a few years ago, but as you could see out there, no dragon. But that box Serizawa destroyed was emitting its call, which aggravated Godzilla because he knows that call is an enemy worse than Kong could ever be. That's why he attacked. The Admiral shook his head. You guys seriously think this is some kind of defense for what happened? My man died out there because you all don't know what the fuck you're doing. We know what we're doing, Admiral. You don't know what's going on, so your reaction is to throw blames at everyone, Dr. Chance yelled. Eileen, Serizawa barked. She backed down begrudgingly, and Serizawa looked to the Admiral. Gojira was provoked into attacking by that device. This is a fact, like it or not. And yes, it led to the death of your man, and all of us feel that loss. But you feel the loss? Doctor, they weren't your men. You didn't watch them grow and mature through training and service. How could you feel that loss? Serizawa regarded him with an exasperation. The loss of life is felt by everyone, Admiral. The connection to them was more personal, but we still feel the loss, he said. No disrespect intended, but, Admiral, but you know, as well as I do that all of us enlist in service to the country, and part of that is knowing that our lives could be lost in that service at any time. So while losing the men on those ships hurt, they knew the risk of the mission, and they were prepared for it, Ford said calmly. The admiral glared at Ford but said nothing. We, ahem, we have to finish this mission, Dr. Lin said. Kong's back on the cargo ship with us, so it's time to head to Antarctica. Godzilla's not coming back? Maya asked. No. Gojira was the victor of the conflict and asserted his dominance, and with that device gone, there's no need for him to fear Ghidorah's return. He won't pursue us any further. Kurosawa added. Maya nodded, but also had a slight twitch in her cheek. Have we traced the source of the device signal? Sarasawa asked. We tried, but we couldn't determine a source. I think Godzilla's radiation was interfering with our readings, Mark said. Maya sighed and looked away as Sarasawa nodded. Then we focus ahead. Let's get Kong to Antarctica, he said. A few hours later, Dr. Lin met Dr. Andrews in her quarters. Hey, he said. Hey, Nathan. She waved and then did the sign for coward, which she happily returned to her delight and shaking of her head. What's up? Dr. Andrews asked. When we reach Antarctica, Kong might be a bit disoriented. If he is, or if he doesn't want to go into the entrance, we'll need a way to persuade him, he said, glancing to Gia. Nathan. Eileen, you saw what happened that night. Kong didn't want to communicate with anyone but her. She trusts her. So, you want to use his trust in her to force him to go somewhere where somewhere where he might not want to go? I know. It's a it's not really a morally right choice, but for the sake of Kong's survival and potentially our own, we have to do this. Kong already has a hard time trusting us. I'm not gonna I'm not going to give him another reason not to. We don't have a choice, Nathan barked, catching her off guard. If we don't get Kong into the Hollow Earth, then he's as good as dead. And if Godzilla goes off the rails again, so are we. You know that. And she collected herself and sighed. I know how much you care for Kong. Anyone can see it. But you have to stop pretending he's helpless without you. He's not. He's a titan, and he needs your helps, not your protection, he said firmly. She glared daggers at him, but she was right. So, what do you suggest? She asked. If Kong doesn't want to go inside, we'll have Gia tell him that maybe he has families in there. She took a deep breath and half rolled her eyes. Nathan? Family? Really? Do you know a better way? She sighed audibly and shook her head. I don't know, but there has to be a better way to convince him to go in and than lying about family. That's something you don't mess with, Nathan. Then we have her say that it's a new home. That might not be enough. Then what do you suggest, Aline? Hmm? How are we going to convince Kong to go if we don't say there's family down there? It's the one thing he doesn't have anymore, and probably the one thing he wants more than the home itself. I know it's kind of a shitty thing to do, but we don't have a choice. She has to go in. Gia looked up at Dr. Andrews. What's going on? Dr. Andrews smiled. Just trying to figure out how to get Kong into the Hollow Earth. Do you need help? Yes, actually. Any ideas? Maybe. Gia paused a moment. What's down there? Dr. Andrews shook her head. I don't know exactly. She looked at Dr. Lin. Nathan, what's in the Hollow Earth? Not sure. But if it's really the Titan's point of origin, then it has to have everything he needs. She nodded. Looks like it's a paradise, she signed for Gia. What paradise? What's paradise? I will face that he will laugh. You sure? Dr. Andrews hesitated a moment but nodded. I'm sure. Okay. Are you going to tell him? Actually, I was hoping you could. Okay. What's she saying? She just says she'll tell Kong it's a paradise. Yes! He cheered, holding up his hand for Gia to give him a high five. Gia glanced at his hand and smiled, giving it a little smack with her own. Once Kong's inside, we'll be right there with him. You'll see. It'll be everything we've hoped for and more, he said excitedly as he left the room. She shook her head and took a deep breath. Tired? Gia asked. She nodded and laid down with Gia curled up against her for a nap. On deck, Maya examined the remains of the device Sarasova smashed with calm indifference, until she frowned and smacked a few pieces of the edge and into the water. Standing up and taking out her phone, she angrily dialed a number and held the phone to her ear. Maya? Checking her surroundings, she whispered carefully. They found it, father. It's destroyed. Well, that's unfortunate, but nothing worth fussing over. As long as it sufficiently distracted Godzilla and made some or all of them feel he's out of control, well, that's the problem. Mark Rochelle has a device called Siren, which reads the call of Monster Zero, so they know that Godzilla wasn't the one who did it. That complicates things. What should I do? Continue your assignment, my dear. Let me make a few calls and I'll reach out when I know what's next. Okay. Good luck, dear. You too, father. She hung up the phone and walked inside. Inside, Mark sat with Dr. Chen in the briefing room observing footage of the battle between Godzilla and Kong, or at least what footage of the fight was above the water's surface. Anything? She asked. No. Godzilla dragged him into the waters too many times for me to really make anything out. Godzilla knows his strengths, she said. Mark nodded. That he does. Do you think he was trying to kill Kong? Not sure, but if he had meant to do that, he probably wouldn't have left when he did. True. Still, Godzilla's exhibiting classic classic alpha behavior, Eileen, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. So, but is it really so classic? I think so. I don't. Why? Because he's never done it before. That's because we've never seen all the Titans awake at once like this. But is that really enough to justify this? I would imagine so. Cause remember that the last time they were all awake was at the time very different to our modern world. The environment was perfect for them. But today, with humans spread so far across the globe, and with all the problems we've created with global warming, deforestation, pollution, etc., Godzilla probably feels he has to keep them all on a tight leash so they don't cause problems with each other's or with us. She nodded slowly. I guess. Still, it just doesn't feel right that Godzilla would go about this way. Sarazawa always said he was nature's force for balance, though, right? Yes, but just because he says that doesn't make it true. We have no way of directly making Godzilla if he feels that way. Maybe not, but his behavior is a pretty big clue. How do you mean? If he didn't care about keeping balance between them, he wouldn't bother interfering with their conflicts or fighting them himself. He'd just let them do as they please. But he's interfering and fighting. Like I said earlier, classic alpha behavior. So, you think Godzilla actually feels like they're all part of his pack or something? Sort of. Yeah. Not really a pack though, more of a community. They share the world and resources, and Godzilla's taken it upon himself to moderate it, sometimes by force if he has to. Seems like he's overstepping his bounds and getting involved where he shouldn't. Would you rather the Titans fight each other unabated? I guess not. Still, Godzilla's fighting them isn't much better. He's the strongest Titan and has the most dangerous abilities. When he fights, the world around him pays the price for it. A fair point, but it doesn't stop the fight directly. But if he doesn't stop the fights directly, then there's no telling how long those fights could last or how much ground they would cover. Every time he interfered, the Titan the fights ended in minutes, and the Titans all went their separate ways. She smiled. You make it hard to argue the point, you know. He smiled back. You did enjoy did always did enjoy digging in with questions to how informed an opinion was. I'd say I just got used to it. She chuckled, stood up, and walked behind his chair and rested her hands on his shoulders. Have we talked? Have you talked to Madison? Yeah, she's doing okay, all things considered. Good to hear. Have you kept have you kept her up to date with on all this stuff? No, she has enough to worry about. Naughty Mark. Your daughter wants to know what you're up to. Whose side are you on again? Both, usually. He laughed. Usually indeed, he said. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world in Hong Kong's Apex headquarters, how are things progressing, Mr. Sarasawa? The project is nearly complete. What is holding us back? The power source. I thought so. So what's next? We wait for my daughter to scan the power source so we can synthesize its energy signal. And then we do as planned. Kill Godzilla. With all due respect, Mr. Simmons, we talked about this before if we... Yes, we have talked about this before, Mr. Sarazara, and I thought we had an understanding last time. I thought so too, but the more I think about it, the more I must protest. If Godzilla dies, then the natural orders of the Titan will be disturbed and the other will run free unchecked. Yes, 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 I remember. But remember this as well. If any of them presents a problem, we will just kill them too. Ren slowly shook his head. If you're really having such a strong second thought, Mr. Sarasawa, then I might suggest that you contact HR and submit a complaint. There's no point. They'll answer to you. Exactly. So either swallow your complaints and your reservation and help me finish the job we started, or take a chance out there without Apex protecting your criminal record from escaping into the hands of the authorities. Your choice. Rand's lip tightened and his right fist clenched. It's quite impressive, actually. Cyber attacks at age 14 into Japan's government's database to look up redacted and otherwise classified information on your fathers and Monarch. Not only that, but you managed to hack into Monarch's system at age 22 in order to steal information on the Titan, namely all the information that had Godzilla's name at that time. I know what you did. Yes, you do, don't you? Ren's teeth grit behind his lips. Well, I'll leave the choice to you, Mr. Sarasawa. Hopefully you make the right one. Good day. Siemens closed the door behind him, leaving Ren standing in an empty room by himself, glaring at the wall. I hate that man, he whispered through his teeth. Leaving the room himself, Ren made his way down the hall to a viewing platform where he looked out over a massive and seemingly empty room, save for a single platform with some kind of massive mechanical device in the center, with red lights flashing briefly on occasion across the outside length of it.